And we're live. Hi, everyone. I feel like it's been forever since I've done one of these. I can't remember if I've done it in the new year or not. But at any rate, in case I haven't, Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you for joining. We have an amazing conversation happening today with an old friend, Kendra Bracken Ferguson, who has just such an amazing career and is distilling all of her career's information into this wonderful book that we're going to start to dive into and just sort of hear top level some of those pieces of advice. I'm going to walk through her bio, but before I do, quick reminder, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Female Founder Collective in the 10th house. What is the 10th house? It is our private membership community. And this year we are going about it a little bit differently. 2024 is all about access and it's about getting to be with your industry. So the industry that we are kicking off with from a cohort perspective are consumer founders, super relevant to the conversation today, because these are founders who usually have a CPG type of business. You might be in beauty, you might be in food and bev, you might have a wellness product of some sort. All are relevant. And it's so good for you to be able to have other founders along the journey that you can turn to and say, do you have a good co-packer? Do you have a good digital marketing agency? What email service provider do you use? All of those things. So join us. I believe and we'll respond in the comments, but I believe it is January 31st is our final day to sign up. So it's coming soon. It's a short application process, but we would love to have you. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into the woman of the hour, Kendra Bracken Ferguson. She is an internationally acclaimed thought leader. Her ecosystem of leadership is rooted in global conglomerate Brain Trust, including Brain Trust Agency, a global marketing firm, Brain Trust Founder Studio, the largest membership-based platform for Black beauty and wellness founders, and the adjacent Brain Trust Fund that invests in Black-founded beauty and wellness companies. As one of the first 200 Black women to raise over $1 million in investment for her debut company in 2010, she's trailblazing three-time founder with 2 exits. Her first book, The Beauty of Success, Start, Grow, and Accelerate Your Brand, launches on February 13th, 2024 through Wiley Publishing. The book is your guide to discovering your own guiding pillars, finding what ignites your passion, recognizing your strengths, and safeguarding what makes you valuable in your business. So we have so many questions, some from me, some from the founders that are attending today. So thank you all for contributing your questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible. So I'm going to kick it right off, Kendra, and ask you that you talk a lot about in your book about what it means to be an entrepreneur. For those who are considering becoming founders, or for those who are wondering if they should keep forging forward, what qualities should they look to as a sign of a successful entrepreneur? I think this is such an important one that's not often talked about.
Well, Allie, you said it, like we have known each other for a long time, like through different iterations of my career. And so it is really such an honor to be here. You know, I'm a huge fan. I was part of the first cohort and community of Female Founder Collective. Um, I love it. And I love what you all are building. And we are definitely sisterpreneurs. And so just thank you. I'm like trying not to get emotional. This is my first time really talking about the book in a public forum. And so it's truly like a manifestation of a dream that I had as a little kid. And I'm like, oh, I have a book. So thank you for that. And, you know, it's interesting talking about an entrepreneur. And even like every time I read my bio, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what have I done? Am I crazy? But it truly is. It's such a rewarding experience. And you know, it's interesting because going through this book and thinking about my journey as an entrepreneur, because I started with this vision of working in PR and becoming a vice president and becoming a president. And, you know, that was what I was aspiring to do. And then when I had the opportunity, as you shared in 2010, to co found Digital Brand Architects, it was this interesting moment of like, am I an entrepreneur? Like, what am I really doing? I still worked at Ralph Lauren. I was the first director of digital media at Ralph Lauren. So, like many of us entrepreneurs, I had a corporate day job. And then Karen and I were literally, you know, at her kitchen table creating digital brand architects and reaching out to our friends and like trying to find that moment when I would leave Ralph Lauren where we could do it as a full-time job. And so it's interesting. And, one of the things that I talk about in literally like the first chapter 1 of the book is called Are You an Entrepreneur or an Entrepreneur? And I like to open with that because, we talk so much about being an entrepreneur. And I found, especially in these last few weeks and months of getting ready for this book tour, that entrepreneurs, we are all so important to the economic success of businesses and just overall. Like, we really need both. And so I always ask people, are you meant to be leading something within a corporation with the guardrails of a corporation, but also the benefits of creating something within an organization? Or are you truly meant to go out on your own and to start something from scratch and to potentially use your own capital, everything that you've got, to put it on the line to make it work? And because entrepreneurship has become so glamorized, I'm always like, you really have to think about the sacrifices that you're making. Entrepreneurship is a defined risk as much as it is rewarding. We're putting our financial security, our reputations, on the line, really in pursuit of our own vision and our own idea. And so when I thought about that, and I thought about what are some of the characteristics, we have to have courage, no matter if you're working in a company, standing up for yourself, or you're out on your own. There's this flexibility, for those of us who were entrepreneurs during COVID. I was talking to another set of entrepreneurs, and we were just saying, like, we were nonstop working. Like, how do we protect our company? How do we protect our teams? What are we going to do? What if we never go back? And, as much as we wanted to say we didn't furlough or let any of our teams go, when you're a small business and an entrepreneur, that flexibility of how do you shift your company to maintain it, and then also this increased integrity that we have because it is our reputation. And I think the other piece is, we have to think outside of the box. Like, you're constantly maneuvering, and is this going to work? Is this going to fit? And so if you are someone who is, I don't necessarily want to have to be putting my reputation, my finances, all these things on the line, then that doesn't mean that you can't have a successful career and build something of your own. It really just goes back to, are you an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it seems like the same. I remember thinking that I was an entrepreneur when in fact I was an entrepreneur. But the second that those finances all ride on you, and when the buck stops with you, it's a very, very different feeling. And when your name's on the door, it's a very different feeling than when you're under a corporation and you do have other people that you can go to problem solve, or to sort of soften the blow, or financially, you don't necessarily stop bringing home your income, right? Or the people underneath you don't stop getting an income as a result of your actions. So I love that you pointed this out, because I think it's not often talked about, and it's such a good point. But for those who are already entrepreneurs, Kendra, and they're feeling a little unsteady, maybe they're a little lost, you talk about the importance of having guiding pillars. What are guiding pillars? Why are they important as a founder, and how do you leverage them while you're building business?
Well, and it goes back to, even as we talk about being an entrepreneur, and I started thinking about, like, it was very interesting, how I came about these divine pillars. And it was in a moment. I have an executive coach that I've had for years, and we do these different exercises. I write a lot in terms of what's happening. What did I learn? Everything is learning, right? And so what did I learn? And as I started to map it, it really came down to 4 things that I have my entire life, and in particular in my professional life, carried. And it's community, mentorship, education, and capital. And it's interesting because even thinking about being an entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur, my pillars, I talk a lot about in the book this notion of claiming your non-negotiables. And it's important because I'm able to claim my non-negotiables in business because I'm guided by these pillars. And so, as someone who is as much a strategic leader as a visionary leader, I over index my cultural index, which, if anyone wants to take it, it's fascinating. And I outline what it is and what it says about me every time. I'm kind of like, are you doing the right thing? But it's fascinating when I think about how these pillars have grounded me, how these pillars have helped me make decisions. As a visionary, I wake up in the middle of the night with new ideas. I own so many URLs. GoDaddy is like calling me all the time. But it also comes down to, if these are the pillars that I believe personally that are important to me, and these are the pillars in business, how do I make sure that I am using them as my compass? And for me, it really does guide, because it becomes the framework of what I'm doing. So when I think about Brain Trust Founders Studio, which thank you for mentioning, which I launched in October 2021, and we have a fantastic team, and I brought on a co-founder. Even going through the notion of bringing on a co-founder was, does our vision, what we believe in, does it align with these pillars? And so the pillars of Brain Trust Founders Studio are community, mentorship, education, and capital. And I always say to entrepreneurs, like, it has to be bigger than our vision, because we're going to get pulled. We're going to see something else over here. We're going to want to do this. And we have to make sure that we have something that defines our vision, even when we think about how our outcomes play out. So one of the things that I think about with my pillars and with the studio is, I believe in community, right? So I built a platform that's focused on community. I'm a huge believer in mentorship and education, and that's mentorship going both ways. You never get to a point in your career where you don't need a mentor who's done something before, who can guide you. You always have to be educated, especially in our business. And, that kind of plays into capital. I never saw myself, I was always like, I'm going to do PR and marketing. I never knew that I was going to become a venture capitalist, or that I was going to have this fund and be invested in, 7 companies, or about to invest in 4 more. But when I thought about capital, it was, for me, like, there's human capital, right? There's social capital, and then there's the capital. And as someone who has raised millions, lost millions, leveraged every credit card I had because I believed in a dream and a vision, there's a certain point in your business where capital is the crucial piece, right? I don't necessarily think that you have to have a plan for your capital when you launch, but you do get to this pivotal moment where capital becomes crucial. And so every part of my pillar, I've been able to expand into my business. It's rooted into me personally, the boards that I sit on, the opportunities that I decide to take, the partnerships that I bring in. And so for me, it is such a compass that guides. And it's been fun too, because in the book, we have a workbook section that enables you to, it asks you different prompts, and it helps you kind of figure out what are the core pillars that you want to stand for.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. And I think as founders, it's also really difficult to be intentional about that sort of thing. But as you mentioned, it saves you so much time. It keeps you focused, because, as you know, most entrepreneurs, one of the I think key pillars or traits of being an entrepreneur is like being very excited every time you see a butterfly go by, and see it as an opportunity, and you want to chase it, and know that you can, but it ultimately is not to improve your business unless you want to go in that direction. So I love the intentionality behind it, and the sort of practice of regularly going back to that is really helpful. The other question that I had for you is, when you're thinking about success, Kendra, what does that look like for you in your business? And do your pillars play a role in what that looks like?
It's so funny, because we went back and forth on the title of the book. And the title is The Beauty of Success: Start, Grow, and Accelerate Your Brand. And it was funny because with my publisher, we talked a lot about success and we looked up success and what does it mean? And it fundamentally came down to like, what does success mean to you? And I think for each of us, we have to claim and own our own success metric, right? Because what ends up happening is that you see the success of someone else and you think that's your success, but it's not necessarily your success. That's that person's success. And I think that we have successes that we overlook, right? And so I try and think about, for me, like recounting joy every day. Like every morning, I get up so early. I love the morning. And I try and think, like, what's one thing I can succeed in today, right? Because we can be our hardest critic. Um, it can be our own internal thoughts and mind that can block us from the success and the achievements that we were meant to have. And so sometimes we think that success is, I'm going to sell my company for $500 million dollars or $1 billion. But success may be in that moment that you kept your products in retail, that you kept everybody on your team, that you signed a new deal, that you actually showed up, that you, for me, that I sat through an entire finance meeting and got through what I needed to get through. And so it's really interesting. I think that the definition of success, that you should define it. I think that we should claim our successes every day, not just the big goals, but the small things. And I think that as an entrepreneur, it's really interesting because there's such a duality in our day. And part of that comes with, Allie, what you said in the beginning, the responsibility of the people. There's an area in our business that I'm working to shift and close doors for different things. And it's really hard because every decision that we make, both good and bad, both the success in our business, we've raised capital, we launched a new product, we hired a new person, there's also a ramification on the business, right? And so it's this interesting duality that if we lose sight of success, or we put success in this box to, I have to do all of these things to get it, then we end up struggling and we end up really being our own like worst enemy when it comes to thinking about all of the opportunities
Mhm.
that we're kind of missing out on. And so I just encourage everyone, like, write down what success looks like for you, big picture, but then every morning, what does a successful day look like? And what's something that you
Okay.
know you can succeed in? Set yourself up for success.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because I was just talking to my husband yesterday and I was like, I feel like we just did a financial review of our own company and I had been very intentional on what success looked like last year. And as we all know, 2023 was a really tough year from a market perspective, from brand advertisers, from just in general with inflation, with the war. Like it was crazy. And there was so much uncertainty. And so I had set a different goal than I typically set for what success looked like. And we achieved just that. And I was so proud. And you have to, I think, like you said, you have to have those little wins because it's such a hard journey. You have to make sure that you're patting yourself on the back along the way to keep yourself positive and motivated to keep going forward. So I think that's a really beautiful lesson for all of us. And I love the idea of daily successes and sort of looking at your day and determining what that looks like. Now, when it comes to that, right, there's looking at successes and saying, I had a successful day, right? And maybe being a real optimist, because I think as a founder, right, that's another thing is we optimist, almost to a fault. But how do you know? You talk a lot about pivoting in your book. So what's sort of the difference and what is that between knowing, okay, like my relative successes keep getting smaller and smaller. It's time to pivot, which is not a success, and or keeping on the path. How do you know the difference?
So it's so interesting. And congratulations, by the way, on your big success, because it's interesting. Every entrepreneur I talked to was like, what in the world was 2023? Like, and it's crazy, things that we projected, like projections were off. It was just wild. So like, thank
Very
you. I'm glad
unpredictable.
that you made it. Right. I'm like, oh my goodness. So pivoting is really, it's so interesting. And I've worked a lot with having trust in myself and my decisions, in that little, like, tap tap that you get inside of you, and you hear something and you're like, whoa, did I really hear that? I don't want to hear that, but you have to hear it. And so it's interesting. And I do talk a lot about it in my book, because there's been so many pivots. And it's funny, chapter 3 is actually called Know When to Pivot to Survive and Thrive. And I think that, to your point, like, we love our ideas, we love our vision, and like, I can come up with successes, but to your point, there are the realities that happen in business. And in order for business to operate, you have to be making money to cover certain expenses. And there's things like, you have to have the right team in place, you have to have all these things. And so I always like to kind of think through, if I have to pivot, what am I pivoting to? What am I leaving behind? And what's the risk analysis on both sides of that, right? Because it is really hard. Like, I talked about shutting down, a piece of my business, and it really came down to how successful, in terms of what success looks like for that business, which is different than my other businesses. What does that look like? How am I showing up? Am I excited about this? What's the analysis of my time? I talk a lot about time when it comes to pivoting, because we only have so much of it, which is, what we know. And realizing that in order for me to survive as a person, and survival means like getting enough sleep, making sure I talk to my husband and spend time with my child, alongside of knowing that I am someone who could wake up and work all day because I love it so much, which I know many of us are in that boat. And I really had to think about, if I pivot and I change this part of the business or close this part of the business, I know that it will give me more time to survive, because I'm going to get time back to do the other parts of my business who are actually doing well and that are thriving.
Yeah.
And I always do the analysis of it. And I really think through, what's it going to feel like? What's it going to be like? And I'll tell you, there were moments when I've held on to things for too long, and by holding on, the outcome of it was far less than the greatness of what it could have been, how I pivoted in the first place. And some of that comes from fear. It's hard, and especially when we create things, we believe in it, we love it so much. And so there's this fear of, like, I'm losing something that I created. There's a fear of, what are other people going to think if I pivot and I do something else? There's
A sunk cost, right? Like, you're like,
yes,
I spent so much time in that. It needs to be a success because I've
yes.
put so much into it.
Exactly. And that's the thing where we have to weigh out, like, in order. And it's interesting, because I think a lot about this, like, in the experiences that I had, and like things that I left, or things that I shut down, or even things that I thought I was going to launch and then I pivoted from. And I think on the other side of that, like, wow, that would have been a dead end, or look at
Yeah.
the success that I'm having. And I also think, like, we have to exhaust every option on certain things. So even thinking about this part of my business, I consulted with other business leaders. I went back and looked at so many different numbers. I modeled it 15 different times. I had my account person model it every which way, and it kept coming back to the same answer. But I said, in some things I can pivot quickly. I make decisions quickly. Some things I could pivot fast, but because it was so personal, I had to exhaust every option to determine that there was no other way, so that I could pivot into the thriving part that makes our jobs fun.
I love that. In terms of wrong direction, right? Say you've evaluated, okay, I need to pivot. How do you know that your pivot was wrong? And then how do you course correct quickly, right? So that you don't sink your whole business under.
So I have a real world example. So it's
Love that.
interesting. Yeah, because it's hard in the moment, but many of you on this call know, some of you know, some of you don't know. Allie, I know you know. After Digital Brand Architects, I parted ways with my partners and I started a company called Brain Trust. And I remember at DBA, literally sitting in my office and whiteboarding out, like I was in such a hard place. And one of my friends was like, it's okay to leave something that you started. It's okay to outgrow something. And it's also okay to not be aligned with your co-founders. And I wrote on the whiteboard, Brain Trust. And it was, I like being around smart people and people that I can trust. And those became, those two words became so crucial. Like I named my company that because it has such meaning to me in terms of what I learned through that experience. And I was sitting there trying to figure out what I was going to do and what my pivot was going to be. And so fast forward, I launched Brain Trust. I kid you not, when we first were working on DBA, Karen and I had put together this list, and this was before Raina joined the business, and we were talking about CAA. And we wrote CAA down, and we're like, CAA is going to acquire us. It's going to be amazing, all this stuff. As the story would go, UTA ended up acquiring DBA. But in the midst of that, I started working really closely with the team at CAA as I was running Brain Trust. And so in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I pivoted into Brain Trust. This is it. I'm talking to CAA. And at the time, we were working with several celebrities together. And I went to them and I said, oh my gosh, my business is so tied up in your business that we should do a partnership. And they said, or we can acquire you. And I remember being like, this must be it. It was on my vision board. They want to acquire us. And I was bringing my entire team in New York and LA. We moved into 2000 Avenue of the Stars. I was like, this is it. And it wasn't it. And it was really hard because I thought that this was going to be what we wanted. And there were so many things that happened that were a key learning, but there were also things where I was just like, am I an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur? Because I don't like doing a lot of the things that you have to do when you work in a big corporate structure. And ultimately, I decided to leave. And we had this conversation and I ended up having to buy the company back, which when I mentioned like losing weight and doing all these things, and that pivot was it was a learning. It was painful, but it was also really rewarding because I thought that I was pivoting into what I was meant to do. I was really pivoting into a new learning situation, into the relationships that I have now, and also my ability to have discernment through acquisitions, through through anything where your company is absorbed and you are giving money for your assets. And so I think about that pivot, but I also see the upside of that pivot that I didn't see when I was in it, that I could only get on the other side. And I got to tell you, the only reason that I'm even doing Brain Trust Fund and the studio was because I pivoted out. Because as I was trying to get on the investment team there, it would not have happened. I would have been squashed down and not been able to do what I was doing. And so when I think about the outcome of that pivot now and the worth of it and the sacrifice, it was exactly what needed to happen.
So pivoting to, you talked a little bit about this before, and thank you for that really beautiful story, because I think the specifics of it resonate so much. And a lot of times as founders, again, it seems like, how could the outcome of you being acquired by your dream acquirer ever be a bad outcome? But it's like, there is so many things we sort of learn along the way. And we do sometimes see that there's a better path. When you're thinking about pivoting and an overall ego, how do you think ego comes into play? And are there strategies that you've used to check your ego at the door? Right? Because another thing about founders is like, we're brazen and we
I love that word.
a lot of times don't feel like, there's anything that can stop us, frankly. So how do you check your ego, and how does it impact overall pivots?
Oh my gosh, Allie, I know, it's so good. So I just have to read this quote. It's super quick, but I included in my book because I think that it's so phenomenal. So chapter 4 of my book is called Ego Who Me. I devoted an entire chapter to this because it is so crucial. But this quote says, ego is important. Without a healthy ego, entrepreneurs don't have the necessary internal reserves to survive the daily rigors of startup life. So that was Ben Yoskovitz. And I think about the both sides of the coin, right? Because everybody has an ego. Like everybody has an ego, and there's so many different definitions of ego, right? It's your sense of personal identity. It's your feeling of self-importance, like, and it also helps you, I think, stand up for yourself, right? And as founders, like we do have to stand up for ourselves. We have to put our plans in actions. However, really thinking about how ego impacts our decisions. And sometimes there can be negative consequences whenever it's kind of like I say, like my misguided ego is at play. And so it's such an interesting balance, right? And like I do a lot of work on just self awareness, self actualization, and being able to understand like when my ego is improving something in business or when it's basically cost me as a detractor. And the way that I kind of think about it is it's almost like this lens of, am I using my ego to defend something that I believe that's going to support other people? My whole platform is meant to be of service to founders. Like that's why I'm here. That's why in my book, I bring in 17 other stories of entrepreneurs because we're here to be of service to other people. And so it's thinking about like, is my ego here to protect the idea, to protect the community? Or is my ego here because I want to bully, I want to push my way through, or I think I know way too much than I do, and I need to step back and let those around me bring in what they know? And so I do go deeper into the definition, into different tools, into different ways that you can challenge your ego and that you can also pull back whenever the negative side of your ego may be causing harm to your team or the idea.
Yeah, I think it's so important because, again, as an entrepreneur, what do? You walk down a path that no one's ever walked down. And again, that's brazen, right? It's like,
Yes.
it's also, it could be considered stupid, but you've so much sort of belief and
Exactly.
in yourself that you're like, yeah, I got this, you know? So when does that hold you back? What
And
about,
asking for help, I feel like the
yeah,
hardest thing is like asking for help, and that's an ego trait.
yeah, yeah, no, it's true. Um, and even as women, we have a harder time asking for help, ironically. And so if you do think about it as an ego trait, it's like maybe it makes you a little bit more vulnerable.
Yes.
Um, resilience, I would love to talk about that too, just on how you can sort of access those reserves,
Mhm.
right? To keep going. Because you talked about that quote and it really brought up this idea of, as an entrepreneur, one of the, I think the number one trait is probably resilience, right? Like you have to be willing to just get slammed down over and over and over again. Pop back up smiling. Everything is awesome. So how do you do that?
It's so funny. It is. It's like that little meme. You're like, the fire's like in the background and you're literally like sitting there smiling and it's
Yeah.
fire all around you. Um, I do think that resilience, there's some of it is an innate trait and then some of it is very much a learned trait, right? And I think that we have to be careful that we don't use resilience as a loss of our vulnerability, right? And you even said it in terms of helping. Like we have to be resilient because at the end of the day, like we can't fall apart completely with our team sitting there because our team has joined us on this journey because they believe in us as founders. They believe in the vision and they know that we've got it. And so it's funny. My mom always says, okay, you can cry for this one day and then that's it. And then you got to get up and you got to keep going. And you do need to address what happened. But we also have to make sure that and Allie, actually, when we talk about the characteristics of being an entrepreneur and this resilience factor, and it's not necessarily masking who we are or like coming up with this pseudo personality, but there is a resilience that we have to present. And that's part of being an entrepreneur. That's part of our job. And I always think of this notion that resilience usually comes because you've had an experience that didn't go your way.
Mhm.
Something didn't happen, you were expecting it. And I try and reframe this notion that experiences educate us. They build our confidence, they shape our worldview, and I think as founders, they give us an interesting perspective of how we see things. Like even in that story, I could have said, you know what, CAAGBG, like this didn't work out. Like I had to buy my company back, rebuild my company. And I could have been like, I'm done. I'm out. This isn't for me. But it was the resilience in knowing that, like, this is what I'm good in. Karen Rabinovitz, my co founder in DBA, she was the first person to teach me to be able to say what I was good at and to not stutter on it. And so, no matter what was happening through all of these experiences, my resiliency comes because it's like, I know that I'm good at brand strategy. I know I'm good at brand building. I know that I believe that I'm here to be of service. And so, we have to figure out those mantras for ourselves that can help us be resilient, even when things are burning around us or things are falling, and to make sure that we're being educated by it and that it's truly building our confidence. And look, it's hard. Like I could be crying on the couch, balled up in a second, but I know that there's something much greater and that I have to get up and be resilient into the future of what I've built, set out for myself.
Love that. And I think it what I love about what you said is that there is space. It doesn't mean that you don't fall on the floor and cry and, have that moment. But I once was like really upset about something. I don't even remember what it was, but I had friends with me and we were on the way to a wedding and I was like so upset. I just couldn't get out of it. And they turned to me and they said, "We're going to have a ceremony." And the ceremony is like, it is your complaint ceremony. You talk about all the things that you were so mad about, and you just, really exaggerate that. And sure enough, I did. And it felt so good. And then they're like, and the second we open the door to this car and we go inside, like, it's all done. That's all the time that you have. But this is our ceremony. And it was so impactful. And so now I'll like do that too, is I'll be like, here's my ceremony. I'm going to cry. I'm going to scream. I'm going to let it all out. And then like, we're good. We're back, back on air. So
So
I love that.
that's your brain trust. I always like tell people, like find your brain trust where you can have those moments, whether by yourself or together, the people that are going to pull you out. Because imagine if they hadn't said, like, this is that time, and then we're going to open the door, and then we get stuck. I literally went to the top of the parking garage the other day, and I was just like screaming, 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 screaming. And then I was like, okay, I'm fine.
You just got to get it out, stomp around. With my son, I make him like, I have a stuffed animal and we name them and he punches them and it just, it helps. We all
Yes.
adults need that. So founders need that. I do have one more question for you, but I want to save it for last. So I'm going to jump into the amazing questions that our founders submitted because I don't want to go without you getting to those. And one of the first questions that we have is, what are 3 things new brands should be doing?
Oh, that's a great question. And is this, I guess this is like rapid fire, but like new brands should be doing in terms of launching? I'll give my perspective, Allie, and then you help me.
Yeah.
I think that one is having a clear path for what you want your business to be and what you want that outcome to be. When I put on my venture hat, there are so many founders who are like, I need to raise, I need to do this, but not quite clear on their outcome. Like, as you are starting this brand, what is the outcome? What's the pie in the sky outcome? What's the realistic outcome? But what do you want to have happen? I also think really being clear on what your brand stands for. Like, I know that this goes back to like branding one-on-one, but if you don't have a clear foundation for your brand, your guiding pillars, your guiding principles, like it is so easy to see a new trend or to see another brand doing this, that you put all your money into developing this new thing or doing that new thing or going here, that you lose sight of. And then I think the third thing is like really looking at your team. Had I had the right lawyer for the first deal that I was doing, I would have had a different outcome. Was that the right outcome for me? Not necessarily. But I think that the team is everything. I really believe in having your right brain trust. So whenever you're thinking about, what do I want my outcome to be? What does this brand really stand for? What is going to be our differentiation point in the market? And then what is the team that I need to get there? Because as much as founders are great and wonderful, the amount of founders who say, I can do all of these things, even when they have the resources to not do them, we know that there's an issue.
Right. First red flag on investing in one of those companies. I'm transitioning. The next one is I'm transitioning my business of one to a studio, which means hiring. What hiring tips do you have on scaling up? I feel like you'd
Oh
be
my
really
gosh.
talking about a team.
So I think that it's have a great finance partner so that you can really model out what scaling up means, what those trigger points are going to be. I always kind of think about like, is this role generating revenue? Is this role fueling the community? Is this like, you have to make sure that a lot of times whenever we say that we're hiring, we're like, and I want this one and this one and this one and this one, model it out. Like really financially model out, what does scale look like? At what point should you be hiring these people? And what do those people bring back into the organization to continue to fuel that scale?
I love that too, because I think it's oftentimes you're not directly looking at the numbers. And if you do model it out, what's so exciting is it becomes very black and white on like, what does success look like? And where do you need to be from a revenue perspective to pay for that person? So that's a great piece of advice.
And
Are
I'm
there
the offender. I always love it. I'm like, yes. And then it's like, no, no, nope.
I know. Are there any term sheet red flags founders should look out for? I'm not really sure what kind of term sheet they're referencing, but I'm assuming, given your background, it's around funding.
I think that like things that are exclusive, if you get funding from one financial institution and they tell you you cannot work with any other financial institution, the goal should be that capital should be working for you to grow the business. Red flags in terms of leadership, like do you have a say in it? Do you not have a say in it? Did they get to determine who runs your company? Anything that involves triggers in terms of valuation. Valuation is that's a whole other session, Allie. So, and I know because you coach on this too, but how they're looking at your valuation against what you're saying your valuation is. But definitely exclusivity, commands in terms of leadership, commands in terms of valuation. There's a few other things, but those are the big ones.
There was a founder I was talking to who had a situation where she had a really big name who's like a semi-celebrity who was going to come into her business, and they wanted to do like a tenth of the valuation that she wanted. And then like they wanted a guarantee of like 25% of her business for very little money. And I was like, you can also go back and negotiate that, right? So be like, I see that you want 20%, but if you are going to do that, if you're going to take 20%, then you need to do this, this for me, right?
Yes.
Don't just because it's a celebrity or a big name or a big fund, don't
Yes.
just roll over at the first term sheet, right? Like they're highly negotiable. And if they want you bad enough,
They want to coach. I agree with you.
they'll be willing.
That's best advice. And even like making sure that there's accountability on the other side. Like don't vest everything just because, to your point, you're like glamorized by what you think that person is going to bring or that entity or, Allie, we're doing another one on this at
I know, right?
celebrities.
On term sheets. We should just a whole conversation around term sheets. We see you all and negotiate those, know what you want. And just like, but I think everything you just talked about is so relevant to term sheets Because what does success look like? What are my pillars? Does this map back to who I am and the kind of founder I want to be and what I want from this business? Don't basically don't negate those things for yourself because you are the most important part of this equation. One last question before we wrap. We had so many other good questions from founders, but I wanted to talk about divine timing because I think that's a really beautiful thing to wrap on. How you talk about a lot about it in the book. What does it mean to you, and how do you feel like that has played a role in your journey?
So divine timing to me is everything. I used to think, oh my gosh, I missed this, or that opportunity is never going to come, and I really had to settle with this peace. And I am a very religious, very spiritual, and it came through this belief that really things are meant to happen whenever they happen, and I believe that it's all in God's timing. And I do so much planning, and I want it to happen now, and I really had to let go and still do the work. I have to do the work and I have to show up on this side. But I do believe that things are divinely ordained and divinely intentional. And even when I think about Lisa Stone being my co founder in the studio and the fun and how we knew each other for 20 years, hadn't spoken in years, and then ran into each other at this one divine moment where there was an opportunity to then say, let's change this course and go through this fund. And so as founders, we want to control so much, and we want it to be when we want it, and we want to know it's going to happen. And I just believe if we can settle into this notion of divine timing, that it will help us really be on the right path and know that, like, this is when it's supposed to be here. I was supposed to meet this person at this time. I was supposed to do this. Then it helps us kind of move forward and to progress in things and to really open the doors for magical things to happen and opportunities to pursue. And throughout the book, divine timing is the theme. And I really end on that in our final chapter.
Love it. Well, this feels like divine timing for all of us who need this in this moment. So thank you so much, Kendra, for your wisdom. Cannot wait to read the book. Can they buy it now? Is it on pre-sale?
We are pre-ordering, so please pre-order. We were named the #1 new release in business entrepreneurship on Amazon because of
amazing.
So thank you all so much. And thank you, Female Founder Collective and 10th House, and Allie and Avery for setting this up. I'm so happy that you guys are helping to support the book. There's a special link for Female Founder Collective members, and the book comes out February 13th. This is the first of our book tour stops. We have 16 more. And so thank you so much. It's on our website, KendraBracken-Ferguson.com, if you want to follow along.
Amazing. Thank you. Our pre-order link is in the comments, so check it out there. One last call out about 10th House. It is January 30th that applications close, not 31st. And so definitely check that out and join us inside of our private community. And Female Founders Day, our early bird tickets have sold out, but general admission is going live I believe on Friday. So stay tuned for that. The tickets are going to go quickly, but we hope to have you all there. Thanks so much, all. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Thank you, Allie.
Congrats.
And Avery, right on